April 18th, 1944. 25,000 feet above Germany. Late afternoon. The sky is calm. A formation of American B-17 bombers drones steadily forward, silver shapes glinting in the sunlight. Engines hum in a familiar rhythm. Gunners scan the horizon, eyes trained for the usual threats. Propeller fighters. Messerschmitts. Focke-Wulfs. Then something flashes past the lead bomber. Not a blur. A streak. It crosses the formation in seconds, leaving confusion behind it. A tail gunner shouts into his intercom, voice sharp with disbelief. What the hell was that? No one answers. Because no one has seen anything like it before. Too fast to track. The object comes back. This time, it doesn't circle. It doesn't climb. It doesn't turn like a fighter. It cuts through the formation. Machine gun fire erupts. Tracers stitching empty air. Guns swing wildly, but the target is already gone. An American pilot grips his controls tighter. That thing wasn't flying, he mutters. It was rushing. Seconds later, a bomber explodes. Not from sustained fire. From a single devastating pass. The unknown aircraft disappears into the clouds before escorts can react. Silence follows. And then fear. The reports begin. When the surviving bombers return, intelligence officers listen carefully. Pilots talk over each other. It wasn't a prop. It sounded wrong. It came straight in and vanished. No fighter moves like that. Some officers exchange uneasy looks. One of them writes a single word on his notepad. Jet. A technology ignored. What Allied pilots do not know is that the aircraft they encountered should not exist. Not yet. Not in this war. Years earlier, German engineers had been working quietly on jet propulsion. Men like Hans von Ohain had proven the concept. Test aircraft flew. Data was collected. Progress was real. But progress needs support. And at the top of the Reich, support was absent. Adolf Hitler had seen the prototypes and dismissed them. Pointless. To Hitler, jet engines were a distraction. They were unreliable. They consumed too much fuel. They did not fit his vision of the war. He wanted bombers, weapons that could strike cities. Weapons that could terrorize. Weapons that could be controlled politically. Fighters, no matter how advanced, did not interest him. When engineers proposed the jet as an interceptor, Hitler waved it off. Make it a bomber, he ordered. The result was delay. Months turned into years. Critical time slipped away. The Me-262 is born late. The aircraft that finally emerges is called the Messerschmitt Me 262. It is unlike anything in the sky. Twin jet engines mounted under swept wings. A top speed far beyond propeller aircraft. 4 30mm cannons capable of shredding bombers in seconds. Test pilots know immediately. This machine changes everything. One of them lands after a flight, climbs out of the cockpit and says simply, "This ends dogfighting." But by the time the Me-262 reaches operational units, the war has already turned. Too little. Too late. Factories are bombed. Fuel is scarce. Pilots are inexperienced. Worst of all, the aircraft is misused. Hitler insists on bomber variants. Interceptor squadrons receive limited numbers. Command decisions are slow and contradictory. Still, when the Me-262 flies as intended, the results are terrifying. Allied bombers fall from the sky without warning. Escort fighters cannot catch it. For a moment, the balance of air power trembles. A glimpse of an alternate war. Allied pilots begin to fear the sound. A low, rising roar. Unlike anything else, it means death may arrive before reaction. But there are not enough jets. There are never enough. And every lost Me-262 is irreplaceable. The weapon that could have changed the war is strangled by delay, indecision, and obsession. And as Allied forces advance on Germany, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. This aircraft was not pointless. It was late. And in war, timing is everything. The story of the Me-262 is not about what happened. It is about what almost happened, and what that reveals about power, ego, and missed opportunity. Berlin, 1943. Deep inside the Reich Air Ministry. The room smells of cigarette smoke and impatience. Charts cover the walls. Production figures. Fuel estimates. Loss reports. Red lines mark retreating fronts. The Luftwaffe is bleeding pilots faster than it can train them, and Allied bombers now reach deeper into Germany with every month. At the center of the room, engineers stand stiffly, holding folders filled with data that could change everything. They are here to talk about speed. A fighter that breaks the rules. When the engineers describe the Me-262, they do not speak in slogans. They speak in numbers. Faster than any Allied fighter. Climbs higher. Carries heavy cannons designed to destroy bombers in seconds. They explain that this aircraft does not need dogfights. It does not need to turn. It only needs to pass once. And then again. Hermann Göring listens. Expression unreadable. He understands air power. He understands what losing the skies means. But he is not the final authority. Everyone in the room knows that. Hitler's vision. When Adolf Hitler is briefed, the mood changes. He is not interested in interception. He is interested in symbolism. He wants weapons that look decisive. Weapons that can be announced. Weapons that can be used to punish enemies, not merely defend against them. A fast fighter does not excite him. A fast bomber does. He fixates on the idea that the Me-262 should carry bombs. That it should strike Allied cities at jet speed, impossible to stop. Engineers protest. They explain that adding bomb racks delays production, that it complicates design, that it undermines the aircraft's greatest strength. Hitler interrupts them. This is not a defensive war, he snaps. We attack. The order is final. Months lost. What follows is not dramatic. It is worse. It is bureaucratic. Designs are altered. Weight increases. Flight characteristics suffer. Production lines hesitate, waiting for new instructions. Factories retool. Test pilots complain that the aircraft is being turned into something it was never meant to be. One engineer writes bitterly in his notes, "We are being asked to dull a blade so it looks impressive." Time slips away. While Germany argues, the Allies build. The front line pays the price. By the time interceptor versions are finally approved, Allied bombers are already devastating German industry. Cities burn. Factories collapse. Airfields are cratered daily. Luftwaffe pilots fly outdated fighters against overwhelming numbers. They hear rumors of the jet. They hear it can outrun anything, that it can strike bombers without fear. They ask the same question again and again. When do we get it? There is no answer. The first operational jets. When Me-262s finally reach combat units, the pilots are stunned. They push the throttle forward and feel something entirely new. Acceleration without vibration. Speed without effort. A sky that suddenly feels small. One pilot later says, "It felt like the future arriving early." In combat, the effect is immediate. The jet streaks through bomber formations. Cannons tear aircraft apart in single bursts. Escorts try to respond but cannot close the distance. The jet is gone before they can aim. Allied confusion turns to alarm. Allied intelligence scrambles to understand what they are facing. Radar plots show impossible speeds. Gun camera footage confirms the losses. Escort pilots report frustration. "We can't catch it," one says. "We can't turn with it. We can't even see it long enough." Emergency meetings are held. New tactics are discussed. But the reality is simple. The Allies are facing a weapon they did not expect. And for a brief moment, the balance of air power trembles again. The fatal limitation. But the Me-262 has enemies beyond Allied fighters. It is fragile on the ground. It burns fuel at a terrifying rate. Its engines wear out quickly. Worst of all, it is rare. There are too few aircraft, too few trained pilots, too little fuel to keep them flying. The jet is deadly. But it is alone, and the next section reveals how the Allies learned to hunt it where it was weakest, before it could ever become decisive. Western Germany, late 1944. Over shattered airfields. The Allies adapt quickly. They always do. If the Me-262 cannot be caught in the air, then it will be hunted where it is slowest. On the ground. The jet's fatal moment. Every Me-262 has one weakness. Takeoff. The jet needs a long runway. The engines spool slowly. For precious seconds, the aircraft is heavy, vulnerable, and unable to maneuver. Allied pilots learn this fast. They begin circling German airfields at low altitude, waiting, watching. A P-51 Mustang pilot spots movement below. A Me-262 rolls onto the runway. Jet taking off, he calls calmly. The Mustang dives. Machine guns rake the runway. Explosions walk toward the jet. The Me-262 tries to lift, engines screaming, but it is too late. Flames erupt. The jet never leaves the ground. Airfields become killing grounds. German commanders know the danger. They hide jets in forests. They disperse aircraft along roads. They camouflage runways. But Allied air superiority is relentless. Every airfield is observed. Every movement is reported. Fuel trucks burn. Maintenance crews scatter. Jets sit useless without supplies. The Me-262 is a predator forced into hiding. Pilots without fuel. Even when jets survive, they often cannot fly. Germany is running out of fuel. Synthetic plants are bombed relentlessly. Deliveries fail to arrive. Pilots are grounded not by enemy fighters but by empty tanks. One Me-262 pilot writes, "I had the fastest aircraft in the world. I could not afford to use it. Training hours are slashed. New pilots are rushed into cockpits they barely understand. Mistakes follow. Crashes increase. A weapon starved of time. The Me-262's engines are marvels, but fragile. They last only a few dozen hours before requiring replacement. Spare parts are scarce. Skilled mechanics are scarcer. Jets sit idle awaiting repairs that never come. The aircraft that terrifies Allied crews becomes a museum piece before the war even ends. Still, a glimpse of fear. And yet, when Me-262s fly, they leave an impression. Allied bomber crews never forget the sound. A rising howl. A sudden pass. An explosion without warning. Pilots adjust formations. Gunners remain alert long after the jet vanishes. The fear lingers. Because everyone knows. If there were more of them. The question that haunts history. What if Hitler had listened? What if the Me-262 had been deployed as an interceptor in 1942 instead of 1944? What if production had been prioritized? If pilots had been trained properly? If fuel had been available? History does not answer these questions. It only records the consequences. And those consequences lead us to the final act of this story, where the jet that nearly changed the war instead changed the future. Germany. Early 1945. The skies belong to the Allies. By now, the Me-262 is no longer a rumor. It is real. It is deadly. And it is still not enough. Allied bomber streams continue to cross Germany day after day. Factories burn. Rail yards vanish. Cities collapse into smoke and rubble. Even as jets streak through formations and tear bombers apart, the formations keep coming. The numbers are overwhelming. For every bomber the Me-262 destroys, dozens more push forward. For every jet Germany fields, the Allies deploy hundreds of fighters. Speed alone cannot stop an avalanche. Moments of terror in the sky. When the Me-262 appears, chaos follows. Gunners shout warnings. Formations tighten instinctively. Escorts break formation, trying desperately to react. The jet flashes past, cannons blazing. A bomber disintegrates, another spins away trailing smoke. Then the jet is gone. Too fast to chase. Too fast to punish. Allied crews know they were just lucky. Next time, it could be them. But luck, multiplied across thousands of aircraft, favors the side with more planes. Germany's desperation. Inside Germany, commanders argue bitterly. Some demand all jets be used strictly as interceptors. Others still push for bomber missions that never materialize. Orders conflict. Squadrons wait for instructions that arrive too late. The Reich's leadership is fractured. Decisions are made emotionally, not strategically. Hitler continues to believe in miracle weapons. He waits for a decisive moment that never comes. Meanwhile, the Me-262 squadrons operate in fragments, never massed, never allowed to strike as a unified force. The weapon is brilliant. The leadership is not. The weight of reality. Even when the Me-262 scores successes, nothing changes on the ground. Allied troops cross the Rhine. German armies retreat on all fronts. Fuel shortages paralyze entire units. The jet's victories are tactical, not strategic. It can kill bombers. It cannot save Germany. A Luftwaffe officer writes with brutal honesty, "We have the aircraft of tomorrow, in a war we already lost yesterday." The final flights. As Allied forces close in, Me-262 pilots destroy their own aircraft rather than let them be captured. Engines are blown up. Airframes are burned. Runways are cratered deliberately. The jet that once inspired awe ends its days in smoke and sabotage. Some pilots take off knowing they may never land. Not because of enemy fighters, but because there is nowhere left to go. What the Me-262 really changed. The war ends soon after. Germany collapses. The Third Reich falls. And only then does the world fully understand what the Me-262 represented. Not a weapon that could win WWII, but a warning. The age of propellers is over. Speed, altitude, and jet power will dominate the skies from now on. Allied engineers dismantle captured Me-262s carefully. They measure everything. They photograph every detail. They test engines. They take notes. The jet has lost the war, but it has rewritten aviation forever. The final chapter of this story is not about Germany. It is about what the world learned from its mistake, and how one dismissed idea reshaped the future. Europe, late 1945. The war is over. Airfields once filled with smoke and wreckage are now quiet. Allied engineers walk carefully among the remains of German aircraft, notebooks in hand, cameras clicking. They stop again and again in front of the same machine. The Me-262. It sits silent, scarred, incomplete. But even in death, it commands attention. Because everyone understands now. This was not just a weapon. It was a message from the future. The Allies take it apart. British, American, and Soviet teams examine captured jets piece by piece. They measure wing sweep. They analyze engine placement. They study airflow and materials. What they find confirms their fears. The Me-262 was not experimental. It was operational. It flew combat missions. It destroyed bombers. It outran everything in the sky. One American engineer writes, "If they had this earlier, we'd be telling a different story." The cost of ego. As the investigations continue, the cause of failure becomes clear. The technology worked. The engines worked. The airframe worked. The concept worked. What failed was leadership. Hitler's obsession with offensive symbolism delayed deployment. His insistence on bomber conversions crippled production. His interference fractured command decisions. The jet was not pointless. It was misused. A lesson written in metal. Every nation takes the same lesson from the Me-262. Never ignore a breakthrough. Never delay adoption for pride. Never force technology to serve ego. Within years, jet fighters replace propeller aircraft worldwide. The US fields the F-86. Britain advances the Meteor. The Soviet Union develops its own jet designs. All of them owe something to the Me-262. The jet that failed Germany succeeds everywhere else. The ghost in the sky. For Allied pilots who faced it, the memory never fades. They remember the sound. They remember the speed. They remember how helpless they felt. One bomber gunner later says, "I didn't fear flak the way I feared that jet. Because flak stayed still." The Me-262 left psychological scars far deeper than its numbers suggest. Almost enough. Historians argue endlessly about what might have happened. Could massed jets have stopped the bombing? Could they have delayed the invasion? Could they have forced negotiations? Maybe. But wars are not won by possibility. They are won by timing. And timing is the one thing the Me-262 never had. The final realization: the jet engine was not pointless. It was premature. It arrived in the hands of leaders who did not understand it, at a moment when Germany could no longer afford mistakes. The Me-262 nearly changed the war. But it absolutely changed the world. And that may be the most dangerous kind of weapon of all. Germany. Spring 1945. The final weeks. Abandoned airfields stretch across the countryside. Cratered runways. Burned hangars. Scattered aircraft parts half buried in mud and snow. Among them lie the remains of machines that were never fully unleashed. Me-262 jets sit with engines torn apart by their own crews. Cockpits are empty. Fuel lines cut. The future lies broken on the ground. Germany's last great gamble ends not in combat, but in silence. The judgment of history. When the war ends, the verdict comes quickly. The Me-262 was the fastest operational fighter of World War II. It rendered every propeller-driven aircraft obsolete overnight. It proved jet combat was not theoretical. Yet it arrived crippled by indecision. Historians agree on one point. The failure was not technological. It was human. Ego over innovation. Hitler mocked jet engines as impractical toys. He wanted weapons that fit his imagination, not reality. He interfered with design, production, and deployment. His obsession with bomber symbolism delayed what Germany needed most. By the time he realized the jets mattered, it was too late. Factories were rubble. Fuel was gone. Pilots were dead or inexperienced. The war had already been decided. What the Me-262 proved: the jet showed the world something terrifying. Speed changes everything. Reaction time disappears. Defense becomes prediction. Dogfights end. Interception becomes calculation. The sky belongs to whoever moves faster than thought. The Me-262 did not win the war, but it ended an era. The world moves on. Within 5 years, propeller fighters vanish from frontline service. Jet engines rule the air. Designs evolve. Materials improve. Lessons are learned. Every modern fighter traces a line back to this aircraft, the one that came too soon. The final irony: Hitler dismissed jets as pointless. The jet age defined the second half of the 20th century. The Me-262 did not save Germany, but it ensured that no war would ever be fought the same way again. Sometimes, the most important weapons do not decide the war they appear in. They decide all the wars that follow.